When my wife, Emily, asked me to join her for her company's annual dinner, I hesitated. These events were never my scene, polished executives making small talk, laughter that didn't quite reach their eyes, and the inevitable, "So, what do you do?" questions. But Emily's eyes lit up when she told me she wanted me there. "It's important to me," she said softly. That was enough. The restaurant was upscale, dim lighting, crystal glasses, and waiters who seemed to glide rather than walk. I straightened my tie as we stepped inside, Emily's hand tucked into mine. I could feel her pride. She wanted to introduce me to everyone, and I wanted to be the husband she could show off without worry. Then, as we reached the long table where her team sat, one voice cut through the chatter like a knife. "Well, well, if it isn't Emily's husband. So, still a loser?" The laughter that followed was sharp, deliberate. I looked up and saw a man leaning back in his chair, smirking like he'd just told the joke of the century. Emily froze beside me. I smiled. Calm. Controlled. But inside, something clicked into place. I knew exactly how I was going to respond that I pulled Emily's chair out for her, ignoring the snickering around the table, and took my seat across from the man who had just called me a loser. He was everything you'd expect from someone who thrived on office gossip, expensive watch on display, hair slicked back like he'd spent more time styling it than working, and a grin that begged to be wiped away. Emily's face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. She started to speak, but I gently placed my hand over hers under the table. "It's fine," I murmured. Then I looked at him directly. "You know," I said casually, "it's fascinating how quickly some people can form an opinion about others, especially when they've never actually achieved anything worth remembering themselves." The table went quiet. His smirk faltered, just slightly. I leaned forward, my voice still calm. "Tell me, do you always introduce yourself to people by announcing your insecurities first, or am I just lucky tonight?" A few people stifled laughs. Emily's fingers tightened around mine. His eyes narrowed, but before he could answer, the waiter arrived with menus, giving me the perfect opportunity to set my next move. The waiter handed out menus, but nobody was really looking at them. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every clink of silverware sound louder than it should. Emily kept glancing at me, silently asking if I was sure about this. I gave her the smallest nod. I wasn't going to raise my voice or make a scene. I was going to do something far more effective, control the entire conversation without him even realizing it. So, I began, turning to him with a polite smile, "You must be doing pretty well for yourself, given how confidently you're throwing titles around. What is it you do again?" He straightened, clearly pleased to have the spotlight back. "Regional Sales Director," he said with just enough volume to make sure the nearby tables could hear. I nodded, taking a slow sip of water. "Impressive. And how's that going? Breaking any records?" He puffed up, ready to brag, but before he could, one of his colleagues chuckled. "Well, not exactly. He's been close a few times." The smirk returned to my face, but I didn't push it yet. Instead, I leaned back and let the silence stretch, the kind that makes someone start to feel smaller by the second. "Close," I repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "That's interesting. You see, in my line of work, close usually means failure dressed in a nicer suit." Several people tried to hide their smiles. He didn't. His jaw tightened, and I could see he was about to bite back. And that's when I decided, it was time to let him walk straight into the trap I'd been setting. He leaned forward, his smirk sharpening into something meaner. "And what exactly is your line of work, huh?" "Still, figuring it out." He dragged out the last words, glancing at the others for approval. A few chuckled, nervously. Emily's grip on my hand tightened again, but I didn't look at her. My eyes stayed locked on him. "Well," I said slowly, as if deciding how much to share, "I don't usually talk about work at dinner. But since you're curious," I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a slim black leather card case. I took my time flipping it open, letting the table lean in just a bit. The gold lettering on my business card caught the light. A few people's eyes widened. I slid one across the table toward him. CEO. Whitaker Innovations, I said simply. We develop solutions your company has been trying to copy for the last 3 years. The silence was instant and absolute. A couple of heads turned toward him, waiting for his reaction. He picked up the card like it might burn him. You're, that Whitaker, he asked, his voice noticeably smaller. I smiled politely. Still think I'm a loser? Emily's hand slipped from mine only so she could place it on my arm proudly. The look she gave me made the entire moment worth it. But I wasn't done, not yet. The weight of my question hung in the air. The man, Mark, as I later learned, didn't answer. He just stared at my business card like it was written in a language he didn't understand. I didn't press. I simply turned to the colleague sitting beside him, a soft-spoken woman who had been avoiding eye contact until now. And you are? I asked warmly. She smiled, introduced herself, and we began talking about her recent project. Within seconds, the table's focus shifted entirely. People leaned in toward me, asking about my work, my company's latest breakthrough, and how we'd managed to pull ahead in such a competitive industry. Mark sat in silence, forced to listen as his own teammates hung on my every word. One even said, "Wait, aren't we trying to get a contract with Whitaker Innovations?" I chuckled lightly. You might be, I said. And if so, I'm sure your leadership will reach out, though I imagine they'd send their best representatives. That landed. A few people bit their lips to stop from laughing. Mark's face flushed a deep shade of red, and he finally dropped my card back on the table as if it weighed a ton. Emily leaned toward me, whispering just loud enough for him to hear, "I've never been prouder." And that was when I decided to land the final, quiet blow that I took a slow sip of my water, giving the table a moment to breathe before speaking again. Then I turned my attention back to Mark, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut glass. You know, Mark, I began, success isn't measured by the title on your business card, it's measured by the way you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the entire table. No one laughed this time. Even the waiter, passing by with a tray, slowed just a little. Mark's eyes dropped to the tablecloth. His jaw worked like he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. I leaned back in my chair, smiling faintly. The funny thing is, I walked in here tonight ready to enjoy a nice dinner, meet my wife's colleagues, and maybe make some new friends. But you chose to open with an insult. I suppose we all have our strategies. A few quiet chuckles broke the silence, not mocking, but in agreement. The balance of the room had shifted completely. Mark was no longer the loudest voice, he was just the one everyone was politely ignoring. Emily squeezed my arm again, her eyes bright with pride. Shall we order? She asked, smiling at me instead of the menu. Let's, I said. I'm suddenly in the mood for something worth celebrating. And with that, the conversation moved on, without him. By the time dessert arrived, the room felt completely different. Conversations flowed easily, people laughed, and Emily seemed more relaxed than I'd ever seen her at a work event. Mark, on the other hand, had barely touched his food. He kept glancing at me, like he was still trying to figure out how the night had slipped out of his control. When the dinner finally wrapped up, several of Emily's colleagues came over to shake my hand. One of them, a senior manager, said, "It's refreshing to meet someone who can handle nonsense with such precision." He gave me a knowing smile before walking off. Emily and I stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she turned to me. "You have no idea what you just did," she said. "Oh, I have some idea," I replied with a grin. She explained that Mark had a habit of belittling others, especially spouses at company events, because it made him feel superior. No one had ever stood up to him publicly before. Word of what happened tonight would spread fast. Sure enough, 2 days later, Emily came home with a story. Apparently, Mark had been unusually quiet in the office. People were openly talking about how satisfying it was to see him get professionally dismantled at dinner. Emily's own reputation had risen, too. She was now seen as someone whose husband not only respected her but also commanded respect himself. As for me, I didn't need their approval. But I did enjoy knowing that next year, if I attended again, there'd be no loser comments waiting for me at the table. It was about 6 months later when I saw him again, completely by chance. I was at a downtown conference, preparing to give a keynote on innovation and leadership, when I spotted a familiar face in the lobby. Mark. He was standing near the registration desk, fiddling with his badge. The moment his eyes met mine, a flicker of recognition and discomfort passed over his face. For a split second, I thought he might turn and walk the other way. But instead, he straightened his shoulders and approached. "Whitaker," he said, clearing his throat. "Didn't expect to see you here." I smiled politely. "Likewise." He hesitated, then added, "Listen, about that night at the dinner." I held up a hand. "No need to explain. That was months ago." But he didn't stop. "No, I mean it. You were right. I was out of line. I let my ego talk." He glanced away, his voice quieter. "I've been trying to do better since then." For a moment, I studied him. There was no smirk this time, no smug tilt to his head. Just a man who had been humbled, and maybe learned something from it. "Well," I said, "if that's true, then I'm glad. It's never too late to change the way you treat people." He nodded. "Maybe I'll see you around." Later that day, as I walked onto the stage to speak, I caught sight of him sitting in the audience. And for once, instead of looking like he was sizing me up, he looked like he was listening. Some victories, I realized, last much longer than the night they happen. That evening, after the conference, I came home to Emily. She was curled up on the couch, reading, but she put her book aside the second she saw me. "How was it?" she asked. I sat beside her, smiling. "Interesting." I ran into Mark. Her eyebrows shot up. "Mark? As in that Mark?" I nodded. "He actually apologized." Emily blinked, clearly not expecting that. "Wow. I'm impressed. He never admits when he's wrong." "What did you say?" I told him it's never too late to change. She leaned against me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You know, after that dinner, things really shifted at work. People respect me more now. They include me in decisions they never used to." And, she laughed softly, "Mark's been a lot quieter in meetings." I wrapped an arm around her. "Good. You deserve to be surrounded by people who value you." She looked up at me with that same proud, grateful expression she'd worn the night I shut him down. "You didn't just stand up for yourself that night, you stood up for me. And I'll never forget that." In that moment, I realized the dinner wasn't just about silencing a loudmouth. It was about making sure the woman I love knew I'd always have her back, no matter who tried to belittle her, or me. And that, more than any business win or public moment, was my greatest success. Months had passed since that infamous dinner, but its impact never faded. Emily and I had grown closer, more in sync than ever. It wasn't just that I'd stood up for her, it was that we'd faced it together, side by side. One Saturday morning, we were out at a small cafe we both loved. The kind of place where the owner knows your coffee order before you even sit down. As we waited for our drinks, I noticed a group of Emily's colleagues at a corner table. A few of them waved us over. To my surprise, they greeted me warmly, pulling up chairs for us. The conversation was easy, light-hearted, no awkward tension, no snide remarks. In fact, one of them leaned in and said quietly, "That night, you didn't just put Mark in his place. You changed the way people see this team." Emily's eyes sparkled as she looked at me. "Told you, she whispered. We stayed for nearly an hour, laughing with people who had once been strangers but now treated me like part of the family. As we left, Emily slipped her hand into mine. You know, she said, I think that night was the best work event I've ever been to. I chuckled. Because of the food? She shook her head, smiling. Because it reminded me that no matter what room we walk into, as long as we're together, we'll be fine. And right there, in the middle of a busy street with coffee in hand, I realized she was right. Some victories are loud and public. Others are quiet, shared between two people who know exactly what they mean to each other. This one was both. A few weeks later, Emily's company held a smaller team gathering at a rooftop lounge. It wasn't as formal as the annual dinner, no speeches, no long tables, just mingling under string lights with soft music in the background. When we arrived, I noticed Mark was there too. He caught sight of us, hesitated, then gave a small, respectful nod. No smirk, no snide remark, just acknowledgement. That was new. Emily and I moved through the crowd, chatting with her friends, enjoying the relaxed atmosphere. At one point, I stepped aside to get us drinks. While I waited at the bar, Mark approached. I just wanted to say, he began quietly, I meant what I said at the conference. I've been rethinking how I treat people. You made me realize something that night. I tilted my head. What's that? He took a breath. That the way you start a conversation can decide whether you make an ally, or an enemy who remembers. I gave him a faint smile. Good lesson to keep. Emily joined me just as he walked away. What was that about? She asked. Let's just say, I replied, handing her a drink, sometimes the best way to send a message is to let someone remember their own mistake. We clinked glasses. Over her shoulder, I saw Mark talking politely with another spouse, no arrogance, no mockery. That was when I realized the real victory wasn't just shutting him down. It was knowing he might think twice before ever treating anyone like that again. The night of the rooftop gathering stayed with me for a long time. Not because of Mark, or even the satisfaction of seeing him changed, but because of the quiet moments I shared with Emily as we walked home under the city lights. We didn't talk much. She just held my hand, her fingers laced with mine, and I could feel the unspoken gratitude between us. This whole thing had started with one insult at a dinner table, but it had turned into something bigger, proof that standing up for each other makes a difference not just in the moment, but in the way you move through life together. As we reached our front door, Emily stopped and looked at me with that same warm, proud expression she'd worn the night I'd shut him down. You know, she said softly, you didn't just protect me that night. You made sure everyone there knew you respect me. That's worth more than anything. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And I always will. We stepped inside, closing the door on the cool night air, carrying with us the quiet certainty that no matter what challenges came our way, whether from strangers, colleagues, or life itself, we'd face them side by side. And somewhere out there, I knew Mark had learned the same lesson in his own way: respect is the only real currency that never loses its value.